Welcome to IMC Live, the interactive webinar series hosted by the Industrial Marketing Collective. We're here to help you connect with peers, sharpen your skills, and drive results in your work. I'm Alan Finnewald, Associate Content Director at Gorilla 76, the industrial marketing agency, and one of your IMC Live hosts. So, speaking of connecting with peers and sharpening skills, have you heard of the Industrial Marketing Summit yet? If not, you haven't been hearing from Peyton recently. So let's go ahead and give her another shot.
Yeah. So we hope that you all have heard about it, but industrialmarketingsummit.com tickets are on sale. There's going to be about between 13 and 15 sessions, three in-depth workshops, lots of networking opportunities, all with industrial marketers from engineering, technical companies, and manufacturers. And it's happening in Austin, March 3rd through 5th. I've already mentioned it, but tickets are on sale now, and we just want you guys to know about it, check it out, and consider coming. We would love to see you there. And that's all I'll say about it today. You'll follow us on LinkedIn. I'm trying my hand at organic social over there, so show me some love. But yeah, Alan, I'm excited to talk about all sorts of things with you today, so I'm going to hand it back to you for the topic.
Yeah, one of the main things that we will be talking about today is balancing lead gen with demand creation. And we have Aren Buresh here, our strategy extraordinaire, and someone who can shed a lot of light on how we've been thinking about this balancing act lately here at Gorilla 76 and maybe how you can think about it too. So, Aren, just to start, what the heck do we mean when we say lead gen and demand creation?
Yeah, so like lead gen, you may have also heard of it as referred to as demand capture. That's the act of like getting leads. Like the goal there is to get contact info that your sales team can, act on. And so a lot of times it's like direct offers, it's channels like Google Ads, pay per click, and you're expecting a shorter term return on those efforts. Demand creation or demand generation is really a longer term play, very closely related to like brand awareness efforts. But this is really all about creating interest, building awareness and trust over time with your audience so that when they do think of, your product or service, and they finally have a need for it, you're the first person they think of because you're like kind of a leader in that space in your audience's mind. So that's kind of the big difference, short term versus long term, and kind of what the objective is for success looks a little different for each.
Yeah, for sure. I think what we've been thinking about in terms of, just how they are so connected. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but a lot of times when Gorilla sets up and runs demand generation programs, demand creation programs, like we're always doing that with the intention of capturing leads too. So like what is like lead generation, demand generation, and how are they connected? Well, like just incredibly so. But the type of content and like where you're talking about like what like level of the funnel or I guess what like part of your total addressable market you're talking to, that's I guess the difference between the two tactics there most specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like also like lead gen is like kind of a little bit more of like the I struggle with the term traditional marketing, but like a lot of what you've seen in I guess old school like digital marketing where it's like the gated content. And in the past, like if you've been following Gorilla or been part of the Industrial Marketing Collective for a while, like we've talked about like, like we're kind of like anti-gate. But I think like what we've been seeing, and we can talk more about this, is like there's a time and a place for that gate from time to time. So yeah, lots here for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Speaking of content, when it comes to lead generation, for example, what are the types of content that tend to be the bread and butter of that strategy?
Yeah, for lead generation, it's really all about the offer and the conversion path. So, like one really common channel for lead gen or lead capture is Google Ads or pay per click. And so the content there is going to be like a really strong landing page that matches the intent of the search that you're bidding on and has a very direct conversion path. Like that's going to be your bread and butter, making that really strong for content. For other types of lead generation, it's really all about the offer. So, what action are you expecting this person to take and kind of like what's the intent behind it? So, you typically want something that's really enticing, like it could be like a gift card in exchange for a sales conversation, or it could be like a really high value tool or calculator that you're offering to help this person do their job better. If you're in a business where you can send samples, like that's a really good offer as well for lead gen. Um, just where there's like a clear, exchange going on.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean the other one that I think about is in like just a webinar. A webinar can be a great lead gen tool. It's got that clear offer. You know exactly what you're going to get in exchange for your information. So like, and that clear CTA. And I mean, there's lots of different ways. Like, Aaron, you keep using the phrase demand capture, and every time I hear that, I just think paid search. Like it's like almost like ingrained in me. But like capture is a form, right?
Mhm.
So like you can put forms on so many things, and with all the different technology that are out like that's out there now, you can literally put like a turnstile form on a video. You can have lead gen forms straight in the feed on LinkedIn. I mean, uh, pop-ups on your own website can be like a great place for the form. You just have to think about like where is your audience hanging out, and like how are you going to capture that interest in that setting.
Mhm.
So still very much needs to be like a multi-channel, or could be a multi-channel um, effort.
Yeah. And speaking of audience, Dale mentioned in the chat that he sees demand gen as out of market versus in market for lead gen. And so, how do you feel like the audience breakdown happens between those two and where the overlap may be?
Aaron, you want to take this first?
Yeah, so for like lead gen efforts, like lead gen's really hard to do to a cold audience because you're asking them to take action, right? And you don't even know, like Dale said, if they're in market or not, like if they're looking for a solution. So that's why I think a lot of like old school lead gen that's all about volume has been kind of discouraging. I always start with engaged customers. So whether that's through like retargeting efforts or what I would call like manual retargeting, because most retargeting audiences are based off of like website visitors and digital, tracking that way. But manual retargeting is kind of like going back to your customer list. You can upload that into a platform like LinkedIn. You can also use it as like a distribution list for email outreach for lead gen purposes, like sharing a new offer to try and re-engage people. So that's typically where I start with that. Um, and then obviously on channels like Google Ads, pay per click, like you're not really building an audience, you're curating the keywords that you're targeting. And so that's a little bit different. You're kind of focusing on intent there. Um, that's how I start for lead gen. Peyton, do you have other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the description of in market and out of market's really poignant, because like I think about like you have your entire like your TAM, your total addressable market, your all of your audience that you could potentially sell to. And I feel like this, as a marketer, this is really familiar to all of us, where you know that there's a small percentage of your TAM that is actually in buy mode. So that would be in market, like what Dale mentioned. And yes, they're prime for lead gen because they're ready to buy, and but that could be just like anywhere from like 3 to 1% of your or less of your total addressable market, right? And so what demand gen is doing is looking at the other 97 to 99% of your audience and nurturing them because they're not in market yet. So what Dale calls out of market, and getting them to the point to like kind of clap back to what Aren said earlier of like building that trust and credibility so that when they are in market, because it could be, you know, a month from now, 3 months from now, a year from now, you're on their short list of somebody that like they're thinking about, and they come to you and convert. And then like back to some of the other things we've talked about of like complementary, it's like that's when it's really nice to have, okay, you've been running your demand gen program, but you have these opportunities, these conversion opportunities for lead capture, so that you make it really easy for someone who all of a sudden falls into, they've hit like a trigger has been like sprung, and they're ready for a conversation, and you're just there ready to catch them. Um, so it's like, yeah, I love the description, but you have to be thinking about your entire audience all the time. And you just have to talk to them in different ways because they are, in fact, ready to buy and also not buying soon. And it's a very different message.
Mhm.
Goes back to the offer, like you said, Aaron.
Yeah. So how do you blur those lines practically and keep those messages in front of people? What are the best channels to be able to do that?
Yeah, so you're talking from like a demand creation, demand generation standpoint?
Yeah, and being able to holistically use both of those in tandem as a complete system.
Yeah, I think it all starts from like audience, like you just asked about. So I think like it's really hard to be in all the channels for all the audiences, but if you really focus on saturating one where there's like the most growth opportunity, there's like a large total addressable market, you have a differentiated solution, you maybe get like good margins there, those are like easier to sell, like that's typically where I start. And then the channels you want to be in from there, one should kind of depend on like where those customers spend time. Some good ones are like paid social channels. So like LinkedIn or like Facebook, Instagram, things like that. I also know like if you have an engineering audience, like a lot of YouTube consumption there. So, like pre-roll is really great for demand generation, especially if you have like a good asset there to kind of go before the videos. Um, so those are a couple that come to mind for me. Peyton, I know you've also talked about like email as a channel too. We sometimes forget that that's like a distribution channel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and well, I mentioned earlier like the term nurture, and I think like this is where like it definitely gets blurry, like you said. It's like demand generation is ultimately building awareness and interest in like what you have available to the market, because they weren't aware of it before. Like they literally didn't know there was a new way to do this thing, or they haven't heard of you specifically. So you want to introduce a new idea, a new name, a new concept to them. And you know, that's really important. But the way that we typically set up like demand generation is like, yes, we have that cold layer, but then like we do intentionally re-engage folks with like retargeting. Like we never start a demand generation program, say on paid social, without retargeting. Like retargeting is always part of the strategy. And like, I guess if we were really trying to be technical about this, like retargeting and like the types of messages that you are putting there um, are lower in the funnel, and they're more tied to a direct offer, which would make them more lead gen-esque. So like it's that's where I see like it getting blurry. And it's almost like you you can't have one without the other, I feel like these days, because we have to deliver leads, and we have to introduce the market to us. And like when it comes to nurture, you've got to think about all the different channels where you could be doing that. And I think email, like you said, Aaron, is one that is um, just an unsung hero a lot of times, but like we have to be really thoughtful about like what sort of messages we're emailing out. Just like whenever Maya, a strategist here at Gorilla, she sent us a screenshot the other day. She got targeted with an ad that literally said, Maya, have you thought about like using this AI tool? And she's like, how did they like scale getting my name into an ad? Like that's just so wild, like on LinkedIn. And now of course we're all like thinking in like, how do we do this? And gonna try and figure that out. But like with email, you have so much control to personalize and segment, and like so much about that contact already because they're in your database, what matters to them. And so you can like super super tightly tailor the message that gets delivered to them. So I think that's where people miss on email is we just like kind of phone it in and we say like, oh, we just need to send a newsletter to our list. And it's like, no, like how are you like segmenting, getting very tightly targeted, whether you're using LinkedIn like and building an audience there or you're using your like in-house audience. Um, and maybe I'm getting off track here, but yeah. So Alan, steer us back to wherever you want us to go.
Oh yeah, no, that all makes sense. But when does a brand, a company, a website, or like, even on a product level, when do you know that you're ready to start executing on some of that higher level stuff?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question because I think that's something that's changed over the past couple of years of how we think about demand gen because you know, that is a long-term play. And I think to do it really effectively, you need a lot of core elements in place. And how I've started to think about it differently is something I'm less inclined to do like right out of the gate, depending on like what factors are already in place. And kind of see it more as like a scaling tactic. So like when you have your messaging pinned down and it's incorporated on your website and you have the right conversion paths and your target audience is really well defined. Like those foundational pieces really do make such a big impact on the effectiveness of demand generation. Um, and so I think like you're ready for it when like you're starting to see good inbound traffic on your site. You feel there's like a sense of confidence around those foundational elements. Maybe some of the lead gen tactics that you're doing are performing really well and you want to like increase the scale of like customers that or not customers, but prospects that are coming into that lead gen arena where you're retargeting them or you're nurturing them with your email content. So I think it's like yeah, it's kind of like a sense of like feeling ready to scale and like a feeling that, okay, we need to expand brand awareness. Like we feel good in the foundation and some of the early lead gen that we've done.
Yeah. I think keyword there is foundation. Like you have to have like the foundational elements in place. If you don't like if your website doesn't function, it's not a good time to like start sending more people to your website. Like yeah, I think like those sorts of things. Like if your message isn't clear, um, you need to clear that up and get on the same page and get alignment. And then Dale dropped in the chat another question about like reporting on effectiveness. It's like do you have a tech stack in place that's actually going to like tell you are you effective? Um, you know, have all of those pieces been dropped in?
What does effective look like when it comes to that tool level?
Well, for me personally, I mean, I feel like a marketing automation platform is a non-negotiable. So like you have to have some way to measure attribution with demand generation, because you're wanting to see which channels are the most effective. And that doesn't have to become an expensive thing. Um, but I feel like if you're a B2B company that makes, that generates more than I don't even know like what the revenue number should be, but like when I look at like just like the client base that we typically work with, and we're working with manufacturers that are anywhere from, sometimes 10 million in revenue a year plus. It's like it feels like you should definitely invest in a marketing automation platform that can uh, just do a lot of that analysis for you and keep track of it all. But like if you don't have the budget, or if you just want to get started, like HubSpot has like a free um, version, and then also there's HubSpot Starter, which for like one seat you can get for like between 15 and 20 bucks a month. And that will just start to capture at least like what channel did this contact come from. All you have to do is put that HubSpot tracking code on your website. And like there's a lot of value beyond that. But I think like that's a non-negotiable. And then the other piece is like you need to understand how like like whatever platform you're using to distribute your message, like what metrics they have inside that platform, and which ones you want, like identify which ones you're most concerned about. I think a lot of times we call these like vanity metrics, but they're, because demand generation is so much awareness, and like you kind of have to continue to give without the expectation that you can receive in terms of like a conversion right away. Those quote unquote vanity metrics, they're leading signals that tell you you're on the right track, that you're engaging people in the right way. So things like audience penetration. So like you've selected an audience of 80,000 people on LinkedIn that you want to target. How, like what percentage of that audience are you reaching over a 30-day period? Like, is it 1%? Because if it's like 1 to 5%, you're like, okay, like this audience isn't as active on this platform as I thought. Maybe I need to consider another channel. Um, or again, like impressions, like how many eyeballs have seen your stuff over time, because we know that behavioral science and psychology says that someone needs to see something at least 7 times before they'll remember it. And if we're trying to become memorable, like all of these things are important. So like you start to know like, okay, my demand program that I'm running has the right budget attached to it. If I'm able to penetrate this audience size with a frequency of, 7+ times a month, and we're just getting in front of them consistently. And then you can start to look at, okay, what messages are getting maybe more engagement than others, more impressions than others, which ones are like gaining traction. And you can start to like hone in on what sort of content folks like, or what sort of channel is the most valuable for you.
All
I
right.
also want to touch on maybe a little bit more of like a qualitative measure, because thinking of demand generation as like a long-term play, one of the ways that you'll know you're successful is kind of from some of the stuff that you can't track in your CRM too. So like how we know demand generation has been successful for Gorilla is like Joe Sullivan, who, handles all of our new business inquiries, like he hears all the time from prospects like, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcast for like a year." And now they're engaging us. We hear, from people in the community all the time, like, "Oh gosh, like we've been following so and so on LinkedIn for forever." So those are harder to track, but I think like having a close relationship with your sales team when you're running a strategy like this is really important, and getting that like qualitative feedback too, because you want to be able to do all of what Peyton's talking about, like with data in platform and in the CRM. But I think what's really powerful, especially for people that are like experiencing the benefit of like the demand that you're generating, is what they're hearing on their sales calls too. I think that tells you a lot.
I totally agree, Aaron. It makes me think of another client that I've had like the absolute joy to work on. They work in like the landfill space, and they rebranded not with Gorilla, but right before they started working with Gorilla. And this was, now like 4 years ago. Um, so literally no one knew their name. They were completely like just anonymous in their space. And they started going to trade shows immediately, which, was it's one way to get out there and start to like get to know people. But like they noticed like after, because we started running a demand gen program for them about 6 months after we started working with them. And the trade shows that they were going to after that like social program started up, they had more people come up to them and say, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you." Sales conversations. They had more sales conversations where they were literally they still knock on doors because they work in landfills. So it's like, how can you really be sure that the landfill manager is going to be at his desk? You can't. So they go, like and knock on doors and go to the landfill. Well, they were showing up at these landfills, and the landfill manager, the operations managers, they were like, "Oh yeah, I've seen you guys somewhere. I've heard of you." So yeah, I just think that's really cool when you see it all start to click and when you hear those qualitative stories too.
Yeah, and that's a great segue for our next kind of topic. We've talked about LinkedIn and podcasts, but then there's also trade shows and knocking on doors. And we all know that the COVID lockdowns made a big splash in the lead generation world that has ripple effects we're still feeling. But then also, there's a lot of these traditional lead generation methods that have made a complete return and are very effective still. So, what do you feel like is the future of lead gen? How has it changed over the past few years? And what is still the same, just because it remains true nonetheless?
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen that is like a good illustration of this is the evolution of thinking around gated content because like Peyton said this earlier, like for a long time we were really like against gated content because you think back to like gosh, I don't know when its peak was, but like the playbook was okay, we're gonna write SEO rich content and then we're gonna have these gated white papers on our website. And so the goal is to drive as much traffic as possible to the website through SEO tactics. And then these white papers are here to get people to download them, get the contact information, lead gen. And so I think from that strategy, what kind of led us to being a little more like anti-gated content with the rise of like demand gen and other ways of thinking about marketing was like, well, this white paper content is not always like super high intent. Sometimes it's a deep dive into like a technical subject that somebody may be trying to learn about when they start a new job. Um, like it was valuable content and people would download it, but it downloading that content didn't always signal like intent to buy. So a lot of times those leads had really low conversion rates into actual quoted opportunities. And so the thought process was kind of like, well, why should we gate this? Like, let's give people this information and trust that they will come back to us when they're ready and making it almost like that's kind of demand gen in a way. You're building that awareness and trust with that like really great content and then hoping you stay top of mind in their consideration. What I've seen kind of change recently is almost like being a little less anti-gated content, but the shift is kind of in the type of content and in the offer. So, having a gated piece of content that shows high intent and signals that somebody is close to a buying decision or is like starting a buying journey and would probably benefit from being on your sales team's radar. So this could be things like a pricing calculator. If somebody's looking into pricing, they're definitely like starting a project. I'm sure like Dale has a lot of thoughts on price curiosity. I think we did an episode on that recently. Um,
One of my
and
favorites.
yeah, no, it's like a really great, and it totally makes sense because we've talked about pricing a lot. Like people just like crave that in their buying journey, and it's so hard to find sometimes in industrial. But it could also be things like really targeted, like checklists, like audit type content. I think that's going to help somebody evaluate and solve a problem. So like a tangible tool. less of the long form content, more of like actionable assets that I think are more, I'm like more in the camp of like gating those because that is a little bit of a warmer lead, I think. And so that's an example, really long-winded example of like how I've seen kind of some thoughts around this shift um, for lead generation outside of like pay per click.
Hmm. Yeah. I think like, there you still have to be comfortable with um, the invisible part of the buying journey today because like this started to change in like 2010, before 2010 even, just when like companies were really getting websites and really like putting content on their websites. It's like there is so much of the buying process that's invisible. They're just doing info gathering, research, they're vetting you. So like help them vet you. So like, don't gate everything, but think about what you can offer, what could signal that higher intent, and 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 strategically layer in these opportunities to collect first party data on people, have them opt in to getting on your newsletter, getting into your sales orbit of some kind. Um, that's going to pay dividends in the future for sure.
Speaking of the future, uh, what is the state of demand gen marketing in 2025, leading into 2026?
Ooh.
Oh man. I mean, I think it's still relevant. I think it's like human behavior. It's awareness and trust at the end of the day. I think the state of it is, it's still going to be a long-term play. It's still, it's kind of more similar to like brand awareness and like billboard advertising where like Peyton said, you have to be really comfortable with the invisible part of the buying journey. Um but I think a great way to do that, especially if you're an in-house marketer, is to lean more into the organic side of things and building a following and, being a thought leader yourself, but also getting more people from your team to do that. I think that's probably where I would be looking for demand gen in 2026, kind of looking ahead.
I think for me, like where I'm looking and where I'm kind of getting more excited, like the longer I've been like doing and like I guess a demand gen practitioner of sorts or a content marketing practitioner is like now I'm just like, okay, I'm excited of like how do I make this more effective? So like really thinking about like each layer of the funnel, like, okay, what messaging, and this goes back to what I was kind of saying earlier, like when Gorilla sets up a demand generation program, we're not just like, okay, this is awareness. It's like we're trying to think about like, okay, what's our problem that we're talking about? So like problem, what's the solution we need to talk about? What stories do we need to tell to help them along their buying journey? And the 97% of your audience that's not yet in buy mode, that doesn't, just because they're not in buy mode doesn't mean they're not somewhere lower, I guess, on your funnel. So like you need to give um, a story arc to help them like find their way to that ultimate like conversion. But like that can also be happening on multiple channels. So like Aaron mentioned organic, like organic, I just feel like it's the best because it's free. But it's also the worst because it feels like you're screaming into the void and like you get like one like from your company page and you're just like, oh my gosh. But like all of that feeds onto different, like feeds back into the big picture. So like, you're thinking about like, okay, how am I showing up on Instagram? How am I showing up on YouTube? How am I showing up on Reddit? How am I showing up in the places where my prospects hang out? And just thinking about what content you can deliver in that space. And it's not always paid. Sometimes it's literally like following the subreddit that your buyers are communicating on and chiming in every once in a while with helpful information. It can be that simple. So it doesn't have to be like a full-fledged campaign because we all know how busy we all are, but just like do a little baby step, I think, like into a different channel this year, or this next year, like just start to explore how you can build awareness in different places. And then like be ready for folks to ask you, like, is this working? You know, I feel like that's really happening a lot. And you need to have an answer for that. So like rewind this episode, go back to the conversation about effectiveness of these programs and think about how are you going to say, like, we know we're on the right track. Here's how we're measuring it. Here's the signals quantitatively and qualitatively, to like make that case.
Yeah, Dale, do you have something to add on that one?
Yeah, I did. I just dropped something in the chat, and when I was selling commercial equipment, um, we were always trying to put out marketing information and have the customer derive and create his own RFPs, request for proposals, and we finally figured out, why don't we just write the proposal for them and kind of spec in generic requirements. We wouldn't mention our company because we were selling to the government, so we had to kind of provide them a really write their project plan for them. And it was really effective because in most cases where you're selling large equipment in a long sales cycle, if you get a request for proposal today and they're going to buy it, they're ready to buy it, then someone else probably helped them write that 6 months ago. So you're not going to have a chance of winning that unless you were involved in that early phase. So what we started doing was really writing, kind of a top 20 requirements that customers look for when they're buying X. And it was generic, but it had enough special requirements in there that would make our solution fit the bill better or whatever. And really it was from expertise in the industry. So I put a sample in there, which is generic from an equipment company that I used to be involved with. And, it can be a great lead magnet. It's not a buying guide like here, it's more of, let me just take it to the next step and kind of write your proposal for you. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've actually modified that for my company and into an email format. So, it's something the customer could email 2 or 3 vendors, including you, and get responses. And of course, you're going to have the inside track on that because you helped write it. So
Yeah,
that was a really good lead magnet for me at the time.
it speaks to the right piece of content for the right part of the funnel.
Right.
Yeah. So we're coming up on time already, but I do have one more question to kind of put a bow on things. We've been doing this digital demand generation thing in B2B for a little while now, and we've been talking about it a lot here in the collective. So looking back on it, what do people feel like was mostly hype, and what has really proven itself useful after we've been doing this for a handful of years now? If you have anything from the group, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, I think when I think about like demand gen hype, like it was such a new concept when people started talking about it, and this idea of like dark social and all these flashy terms that always, start in the SaaS area. I think when I think of hype, it's all about like execution and expectations, where I think demand gen can feel overhyped. I think when it's applied too early, when it's expected to generate leads in the short term, when there are a lot of concerns from leadership about direct attribution, when budgets are really low, I think those are, if you tried to execute demand gen in those conditions, like, yeah, you'd probably think it's overhyped because it's like, I don't have the right like tools and support and foundation to really give this legs. But I think, holistically, the idea of it is still, relevant. It's just, it's human behavior. It's recognition over time. So I don't know, Peyton, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything that you just said. I think like the thing for me is that I feel like demand gen is not new. I feel like I feel like it wasn't new 3 years ago when I heard the term for the first time. Like I feel like it's truly just brand awareness, brand marketing, content marketing. And so like anyone that's listening to this, like if you're just like, oh God, I have to learn another thing, keep up on it. It's not. It's really just like what's the new thing that you probably need to be learning? You probably need to be learning how to use like a new platform, a new channel. That's what you should be worried about. But like the foundational pieces, it's just content that you're making for specific audience in a specific part of their buying journey. And then it's where you're distributing it. So yeah, I feel like that's where it's been like it's the word itself, I feel like has been hype, but the activity is critical to success, whether you're marketing B2B, B2C, direct to consumer. Like, I feel like all of that, like, you just want to be on everyone's short list. And that's always been the goal of marketing. And so, yeah.
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. But Aren, thank you so much for joining us today. If people wanted to continue the conversation or maybe, ask you a question, whatever it may be, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I spell my name a little non-traditionally. It's Aren if you're looking for me, but yeah.
Perfect.
We'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll get some people reaching out. So our next IMC Live will be on November 6th, and Peyton is going to introduce us to a new friend of hers, Kelly Battaglini. Kelly,
Yeah, that's good. That's good, Alan.
oh man, I've been over here sweating bullets just about to say that name. Kelly worked as a senior product marketer in-house at Phoenix Contact, and she's going to pull back the curtain to share how she sustained impact and revenue for her product line day in and day out. And last but not least, we want to invite you to join the ongoing conversations like what we just had here in the Industrial Marketing Collective on Circle. So learn more and request access at industrialmarketingcollective.com. So, Peyton, did I forget anything?
No, that's great. We just love seeing you guys. Thanks so much for being here and being part of the conversation. And, we're always looking for, we have our topics posted for the rest of 2025 now, but 2026 is already underway. So if there's something that you're just like, I'd love to have a dive on this or brainstorm with folks about this topic, just go ahead and send me a message anytime. Just peyton.warren@girl76.com or reach out to Alan. I'm on LinkedIn, whatever, but just know that we always try to make this relevant. And the way we do that is by listening to y'all. So we'd love to hear your feedback. But thank you,
Always.
everyone.
Have a happy Halloween.